Hi, and welcome to LoanOfficerSchool.com, and this is our How to Read a Credit Report video. All right, so again, you can always reach me at Charmin@LoanOfficerSchool.com. There's our phone number, and always visit our website, www.LoanOfficerSchool.com, for all of our other training programs, videos, classes, and everything you need for your mortgage education needs. So how do you read a credit report? Well, a couple of high points of things you definitely want to remember. If you've got an installment debt, you might be able to get that payment not included in the debt ratio if there's less than 10 months remaining on it. Also, if you can show 12 months canceled checks to show proof that someone else is paying that debt, very often a lender will not include that payment amount in the debt ratios. So it's a very good trick if you know that the borrower has something on their credit report, but they're not making the payment. You might be able to eliminate it by talking to the lender and seeing if you can get 12 months canceled checks from the borrower to prove someone else is making that payment. It doesn't always work, but often it does. All adverse credit or inquiries requires a letter of explanation. Make sure if there is anything negative on that credit report that you are looking it over and making sure that it's explained and then it's in a situation that is unlikely to repeat itself again in the future. Most credit reports are only good for 90 days, but double check with your lenders on that one because sometimes a lender might re-pull a credit report after 30 days, sometimes 60. So make sure that you know each lender's nuances so that you're not pushing the envelope on how long your credit report is good for. In order to pull a credit report, you need to get your name, address, Social Security number, and the borrower's permission. Now that permission can be over the phone, but make sure you are documenting that the borrower gave you permission on the phone on X day at X time to make sure that you're covering your backside and you're not being told or you don't get in trouble for pulling a credit report without someone's permission. All right, one of the first things that you're going to look at on a credit report is fraud alerts. All right, somebody's going to go through a safe scan or some type of a database and it's going to show you whether or not they have a fraud alert. That means that somebody has probably stolen their credit before, or they've just somehow have something on their profile that is a high credit risk. So anytime a borrower has notified the credit bureaus that they've had fraud on their credit before, you're going to have to double check and do extra checking and insurance that the borrower is who they say they are. All right, so that's what you're going to be looking for here. The next piece on the credit report that you're going to want to look at is consumer identification or the verification. Double check their names, all right, and ask them if the borrower is all of these names. Sometimes files can get mixed and you've got more than one person's information on your credit report. Also double check all of the addresses and make sure that the dates of those addresses still make sense and that they fit into the profile. Now, Social Security number, of course it's blacked out for security reasons, but this Social Security number you want to make sure matches what the borrower gave you and is listed on the application. So you want to make sure that you're double checking what the Social Security number is as the credit report found that number attached with which names. So make sure you've got the right one. When it comes to address and employment information, you want to look at the current address. Is that correct? You're also going to look at present employment. Does that match what is on your application? Is everything consistent? Then you want to move on to the credit score. You want to look at all three of the credit scores. You have here Beacon of 745. You've got a Classic score of 734 and a Fair Isaac score of 717. This is the TransUnion score. We used to call that an Empirica, but it looks like it's changed. All right, so those are your three scores. Now, most lenders are going to do one of two things. They're going to take the middle of the two, which in this example would be the 736. You throw out the high, you throw out the low, and you go with the middle. Other lenders might add all three together and divide by 3 to come up with what the average credit score is. So you just want to, again, make sure that you know who's going to do what with whom at which lenders, okay? All right, so this is where it gets to be tricky. What are you looking for on these darn credit reports? So it's things that you want to make sure you're paying attention to. Number one, look at the credit or account number. If there is a balance, which here it looks like there is, does the borrower list that on their application as a liability? If not, ask them if they forgot about it. Does somebody else make the payment? Why did they not put it on their application? And find out if it is truly a debt, because if it is, you're going to have to count it into that borrower's total debt ratio. So that's the first thing you're going to do, is look and see if everything on the application matches what's on the credit report. Next thing you're going to do is look at the date reported. If this was May of 2011, you want to make sure that the May of 2011 is as close to today as possible. So if I was in September, we haven't reported on this for a little while, so that could be problematic. So we want to make sure we've got the most up-to-date information available. Then we're going to look at last activity. Last activity typically is symbolic of when the last payment was made. Once again, if I'm in September and this is showing May, I might have a problem on my hands, so I definitely want to be paying close attention. Also, I want to look at the date my credit report was, or this account was opened. Now, this says that this account was opened in March of 2011. It was last active on May of 2011. Therefore, I've got 2 months of history there, right? So that's probably okay. But I'm going to be looking to match that up with something else in just a moment. Now, I also want to look at my balance owing. Is the balance owing pretty much accurate? Is that what my borrower told me it was? Has my borrower paid this down by some significant amount and it hasn't shown up on the credit report yet? If you have a borrower who says, no, I don't owe $32,000, I owe $15,000, then you want to get a copy of their most recent statement so that you can submit that with the credit file, and in a Dear Underwriter letter say, please see the borrower's credit card statement that shows the balance is not what it is reflected on the credit report, it is what it's shown on the actual credit card statement, or something along those lines. So make sure your balance is what it's supposed to be. Next thing you want to look at is terms, all right? So it says that basically it looks like they're paying it once monthly, and this one here would be a 72-month term, all right? 72 months, is that a car? Could be a mortgage. Nope, it's a note loan. It's an installment loan. So that's either a second mortgage, or it could be a, since it doesn't say real estate, chances are because it says installment, INS, and a note loan, it's probably a car. All right, moving on to months of history reviewed. This is your clincher. This is the one that you want to match your date opened and your last activity. Now, this is where a lot of loan officers screw up, and they don't realize that there's a 2 here, which means 2 months, but over here, this account's been open for 10 years. Well, if that was the case, it means they're only reporting the last 2 months of activity on this account. If this is a 10-year account, I need the last 2 years of history, not the last 2 months. So this is when I'm going to file for an update or get an updated credit report or have a double check done, because I need to make sure that I'm looking at the last 12 months of history, not the last 2 years of history, not just the last 2 months. So that's where this really needs to match up with your last active and your open date. And that's the biggest mistake that loan officers make. Now, you also want to look over here at your days of historical status. 30-day column means this is how many lates the borrower has, or how many times the borrower has been late by 30 days. How about what if there's anything in the 60-day column or on the 90-day column? Now, by the way, it doesn't just go to 90. 90 is usually 90 plus. So if you had somebody who hadn't made a payment in 6 months, this is going to be the 90 plus column, okay? So you always want to be looking and seeing if there's anything in that column. Now, just because you see something, maybe there's a 2 or a 3 or a 4 in there, that doesn't mean that it's happened recently to where it's going to affect the borrower's ability to get that loan. But if you see numbers here, you want to look at the string, which I'll show you in just one moment, so that you know whether or not those lates are recent and are going to affect your borrower's ability to get a loan. Now, the reason I pointed this out, here you see 000, which means no 30s, no 60s, no 90s. And then you've got series here that says all ones. Well, clearly a 1 means no lates, right? They made their payment on time. So if you had a string that had a 2 somewhere in here, then that's going to mean 30 days late. If there was a 3, that means 60 days late, because 1's on time, 2 is 30 days, 3 is 60 days, 4 is 90 days, 5 is 120 days, and so on and so forth. So when you're reading a credit report, it's really important to look at all of these factors. I can't tell you how many times a loan officer looks right here, they see no lates, but they didn't look over here into their months reviewed column. They didn't see that it was a 1 or a 2, but that account has been open for, again, 10 years. They should be 120 months reviewed, not 2. So that's where loan officers don't pay too much attention. They miss it, and the next thing you know, they've got lates in the last 2 years, and it completely affects the borrower's ability to get the loan at all, or it affects the costs or the fees or the rate to do that loan. All right, that is it on reading an actual credit report, but let me give you a little bit of further knowledge when it comes to credit scores. Credit scores are based on recency, severity, and frequency of the information that it sees on the report. Now, the purpose of the score is to tell us the borrower's likelihood of having a 90-day late within the next 2 years. So the closer you are to 300, the more likely you are to have a 90-day late in the next 2 years. The closer you are to 850, the less likely you are to have a 90-day late in the next 2 years. Now, a lot of people think if they pay off collections or charge-offs that it's going to help the score. Think again. Back here, if I've got a charge-off or a collection that was opened 5 years ago, and it was last active 5 years ago, okay, it's at least seasoned and dated, so the severity and the recency isn't popping up and affecting my score too terribly negative. But if you all of a sudden tell your borrower to pay off that collection or that charge-off, what's going to happen is activity on that bad account is going to now be reflected. Instantly, that's going to hit your credit score in a negative way. So that's one thing you want to make sure that if you don't understand credit scores, don't give advice you don't know something about. Because again, if you had activity on a bad account, let's say it was a charge-off or a collection, and you told the borrower to go pay it off, you just given them recent activity on a severely bad account, and it's showing frequency because of the date opened and the date active, that's going to become a problem and it's going to drop your borrower's credit score. So make sure, again, you don't advise borrowers to do something that you're not aware of. Now, when it comes to a credit score, your score is determined within 5 separate categories. So basically, this is the 5 pizza slices that goes into calculating a credit score. 35% of your credit score is determined by how you've paid your payments in the past. So if you've always had a good payment history, that's good because 35% of your score is going to be calculated off of how you've paid your payments historically. Now, the next big piece of the pie is 30% of amounts owed. What we're talking about here is how much you owe versus your high credit limit. So if you have a balance of $5,000 but a high credit limit of $10,000, you've got $5,000 used and $5,000 available, so you're right smack in the middle. That means that you are at 50% of your available credit. Well, people who are deeply in debt or have low credit scores or have 90-day lates currently, they have a history of having high balances or maxed out credit cards or maxed out usage. Therefore, that's going to ding your score. So if you're ever looking to improve your score, you should try and pay down a balance below the 50% mark so you have plenty of rooms to still use that credit, and you're really not looking like you're living off of credit cards or just credit in general. The next piece of your credit score that is determined is by length of credit history, and that calculates or counts for 15% of the score. 15% determined by how long you've had credit. If you're 40, you've probably had credit for 20 plus years. If you're 20, you've probably had credit for only 1 or 2 years, maybe a little bit longer. So the longer you've had credit history and the better that credit history is, the better off your score is going to be. The next piece of the pie is new credit. 10% of your credit score is determined by new credit or inquiries. How often are you looking to apply and obtain new credit? Now, if you pull your own credit report, that's just you looking to find out what's on your credit report. That doesn't affect your score negatively. But if you are applying for credit cards or a car loan or a student loan or department store cards, that can affect your score up to 10% because people who apply for new credit all the time, they have a higher likelihood of having a 90-day late within the next 2 years. And then the last piece is types of credit used. And when it comes to type of credit, this is again 10% of your score. This is, do you have a whole bunch of junky little accounts like those little department store cards? No, I'm not saying department store cards are bad. I have plenty of them myself. But you don't want to have too many of those little piddly accounts and nothing that's really a good, strong, solid account. A car loan takes some qualifying. They're going to look at your credit, they're going to look at your income, they're going to look at your stability and determine whether or not you are qualified to get that car loan. Obviously, a lot goes into calculating or to getting a mortgage, so you're going to be looking at a whole lot more than just, can this person fog a mirror? If they can fog a mirror, that just means that they're alive. It doesn't mean they're necessarily going to pay their debt back, right? So that's why type of credit is calculated as 10% of your score, because the how much quality credit you have is an indicator of your likelihood of having a 90-day late within the next 2 years. All right, and that is the conclusion of our credit report and how to read a credit report and how to understand a credit score. For more information, visit our website, www.LoanOfficerSchool.com. Thanks, and hope to see you at a future course.